Live, I'm Brody, and as always, we're letting you in early before we begin tonight's webinar at 10:30. Tonight's interview, of course, is with the man on the screen there, Jeffrey Deering, the President of the Board of General Purposes. In a Blue Peter style, a great way of describing it, tonight's Solomon Live is one we've prepared for you already. But thank you very much indeed to everybody who submitted your questions to us via email. Ladies and gentlemen and brethren, we shall begin with you shortly. Ladies, gentlemen, and brethren, we are live across the UK. Indeed, we're live across the world. I'm Brody. I'm the Provincial Communications Officer for the distinguished province of Worcestershire, and my job is to host these lively webinars of Freemasonry conversation. And thank you very much indeed to those of you who have submitted questions already for our very special guest this evening. So, without any further ado, our Solomon Live tonight is me, Jeffrey Deering, the President of the Board of General Purposes. Jeffrey, how the devil are you?
Thank you very much. I'm absolutely fine, Brody. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you.
It's great to have you here. A lot of people are excited about this because they're going to walk away learning a lot about the Board of General Purposes. But before we get there, in time-honored fashion, what we like to do, Jeffrey, is get to know you a little bit more as well. So why did you become a Freemason in the first place?
Well, I'm a lawyer, as you know, Brody, and when I was an articled clerk, as they were called back in those days, my senior partner and one of his colleagues, unbeknown to me, were both Freemasons, but they were great men. I learned an awful lot from them and trusted them, and they asked if I would like to go to a Freemasons meeting, and that's how it all started, really. And I trusted them, respected them, so I thought it was good enough for them, then let's have a look at it, and that's how it started.
Oh, fantastic. And was it everything that you wanted it to be from the beginning, or was it a slow burn?
I suppose it was a bit of a slow burn, but as I got to know everybody in the lodge, they were a really nice group of men, and we got on very well together. And I found it, from a busy professional life, I really enjoyed my Freemasonry and chatting to people who I knew and could trust. I really enjoyed it. It had the added benefit that the temple, the lodge still has 50 years later, is an old building built in the reign of King Richard II. It goes back 700 or 800 years, and it's a lovely building, but in February of 1974, when I was initiated, it had no heating. And my goodness, was it cold. And I thought, well, this was part of the trial that one had to go through.
I seem to remember having a similar thing in my lodge, actually, when I was initiated in February. I think I thought that was a thing as well. And Jeffrey, we're going to talk about the splendid building you're in at the moment, because we can't ignore that.
It's magnificent. Freemasons Hall, 405,000 square feet, built by Freemasons, designed by Freemasons for Freemasons. It's a fantastic building, and you can never get tired looking at it, wandering around it. And for all of you who've been in the Grand Temple, it's absolutely magnificent, particularly now when we've renovated the ceiling, and it looks absolutely splendid. It's a great building. Oh,
I've always said, Jeffrey, any Freemason at all needs to go there and just get a sense of the organisation that we're part of. And going back to my initiation, I think I did that within a couple of months of joining. It's just an incredible building. So you've achieved greatness in Freemasonry. President of the Board of General Purposes, but also the Provincial Grand Master for East Kent as well. How did that happen?
Well, I'm a Kent lad. I was actually born in Maidstone, so Kent's my home county. And how did it happen? Well, very quietly is the answer. I didn't even visit a lodge for 5 years, and we didn't have any music in my lodge. So I was amazed to suddenly find everybody singing at a lodge meeting that I visited 5 years later. But I just got on with going through the various offices, as we all do. And then having gone through the chair in the beginning of the 80s, somebody said we need a secretary. So Muggins got the job, and I was secretary of the lodge for 7 years. I also did 4 years as treasurer, so I know what you're all doing in your lodges. Following on from that, I was then invited out of the blue, really, to become a steward in the province of East Kent. And the following year, I became the active senior Grand Warden, and thoroughly enjoyed that. We did a consecration in that year and had a lot of fun. And then it was quiet for a couple of years, and I was then, very privileged, almost 30 years ago now, to receive Grand Office as a past assistant Grand Registrar. I still had that office when, I don't know how, 15, 16 years ago, I was asked to join the appeals committee. And that was my first taste, really, of coming up to London regularly. And I was involved with that for 4 years, and then received the invitation to become Provincial Grand Master and Grand Superintendent of the Masonic Province of East Kent.
Much deserved, Geoffrey, much deserved. But then, obviously, little did you know your future would be the president of the Board of General Purposes. And we've got people joining us this evening at various levels of Freemasonry. So in layman's terms, what is the Board of General Purposes? I know we could talk about this for 2 hours alone, couldn't we?
We could. And the shorthand, Brodie, is that the board deals with all the administrative issues. They employ all of the staff and run the whole of the building and all of the assets of Freemasonry. So it's a big obligation, and we control the control of the finances has been a massive challenge, as you might imagine, through the period of the pandemic, which had a major effect because we couldn't have meetings, therefore there's no membership fees. Some of our tenants couldn't pay their rent. There was no income coming in from the lodge rooms here in Freemasons Hall because there were no meetings, and there was no commercial activity. And we receive a very large sum of money each year from commercial activity, but it's a very popular building to film in, have exhibitions in, fashion shows, all sorts of things. And that helps us enormously and helps us control the membership fees, of course. Yeah.
Well, that's a very rough idea of what the Board of General Purposes does. And as I've just alluded to, we could talk about this for a long time, but let's talk about your very important job. What does that involve? What does the president do within all of that?
It's genuinely a very privileged position because they're in the heart of the organisation. So you've got probably as good as idea as anybody about exactly what's going on in every aspect of it. So the board, in order to do its job and to cover all of the aspects that it's responsible for, I recounted them on the train this morning, and it's 11 separate committees that we have to deal with all of the issues. I can go through them, but you probably wouldn't want me to, but it's modernized, and in the same way as you'd find elsewhere a remuneration committee, because we employ over 100 people. We do now have a remuneration committee with people who have the skills to do that. And I think one of the big changes in the board, I've spoken to you about how the constitutions looked in 1926, which is very different from how they look.
Yes, completely different.
And the specifics of who is on the board, the board is much smaller than it used to be in years gone by. And it's very important to have people with the right skills on the board, as well as the right Masonic rank in terms of what their job is in Freemasonry. and their skills in life are very important to enable the board to be as good as it possibly can be. And areas like, in the modern day and age, areas like risk management are very important. Data protection is very important, and we now have a general counsel within UGLE in Donald Taylor, who's terrific and very helpful from not only my perspective, but the perspective of the whole organisation. And he works closely with the Secretariat, and I'm sure everybody knows very well Brother Graham Redmond and Adrian Marsh, our Grand Secretary, who started in September. All rely on that, and they have people that they can go to, have the knowledge and professional skills that are required. And we've got a lot of such good people amongst our very large membership, and it's making use of those skills when we need to, which is very helpful.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it, Jeffrey? It makes complete sense to tap into people's skill set and make the most of that. So you've done such a brilliant job of explaining what the board does in general terms, if you will. How do you think Freemasons in their lodges think of the board when you visited the many lodges that you have done in the past? How do you think Freemasons as a whole should treat the board of general purposes? Because I've got a sneaky feeling that especially a lot of new members, they wouldn't know it even exists.
Well, Brodie, if I just look at myself, what did I know about the board 30, 40 years ago? Nothing, absolutely nothing. Yes. I didn't know they existed, let alone what they did. So I think people don't have a very great knowledge of the board, what it does, or even perhaps who's on it. And perhaps it helps our audience today to know who's on it. And it's now very much specified. And if you forgive me for one moment in looking at the book,
no, not at all.
It actually sets out in there how it is today. And so you've got the president, deputy president, the Grand Chancellor used to be on it, but we've now got James Long as one of our directors on the board, and he was the deputy president, and he's now the president of the MCF. That helps us because it helps with our alignment with MCF and working with them, and that's helpful. So we don't have the Grand Chancellor, but we do have the president of the MCF on the board of general purposes. We have the president of the committee of general purposes, Worship Brother Professor Stephen Tucker, who's my equivalent on Royal Arch, and that's, you know, the link between craft and Royal Arch, very important now, very important to the strategy, very important to the future. So that's helpful from a board perspective. And a lot of I don't know if people understand this, but a lot of people who have office in what I would call the sort of professional positions of Freemasonry, such as the Grand Treasurer, the Grand Secretary. The Grand Secretary is also Scribe Ezra in the Royal Arch. Grand Treasurer is Grand Treasurer in the Royal Arch. And of course, the rulers all have both sides of the orders in view. Craft, of course, is the key basis, but the craft is increasingly, perhaps in my time, has worked closely with Royal Arch, and that undoubtedly will continue to be the pattern, I believe, going forward, and it makes sense. Who else do we have? Not more than 7 additional members, and you'll note that I haven't mentioned the Grand Treasurer or any of the secretaries. That's because they are at every board meeting. So the Grand Secretary is at every board meeting and reports, and also at every board meeting is a deputy Grand Secretary, Worship Brother Graham Redmond, who's invaluable in terms of what we're doing at the next quarterly communication with regard to ranks, with regard to disciplinary issues. And we also have both assistant secretaries, Sean Christie, everybody will know, and Oliver Codrington. So that's the team we have there from who are employed by UGLE. So we got the whole of the Secretariat there, and that's very important given the range of things that we do at board meetings. Then who else do we have? Because we got 7 slots available, and I've mentioned James Long. Tom Milner is the chairman of Audit. We have an audit committee that's very important, and having
very well named, yeah.
But again, he reports directly to the board. That's important. We also have a risk committee, and he's able to deal with that issue as well, which is very important in modern day and age. We've got to have at least 2 provincial Grand Masters, and we've in fact had 4, because we've got Right Worshipful Brother Jonathan Whitaker, who's the provincial Grand Master of Hampshire, Isle of Wight. We've got Ian Chandler, provincial Grand Master of Surrey. Most important, we need 1 past master of a metropolitan lodge. So we thought Sir Michael Snyder would probably fit that bill.
Oh, he'd be all right. Yes, he'll do.
And he's terrific. I mean, with his experience, particularly in finance, again, a great addition to the board. And of course, the Grand Secretary's got huge experience in that area as well, as has the Treasurer. So, I mean, we're very well placed. And I have to say, I found everybody enormously helpful as a humble lawyer when we were dealing with all the financial aspects, and there were lots of them to consider during the pandemic. It was a tough time. Probably if you said to me, what's the most difficult thing you've had to do during your time?
Oh, yeah.
That period was seriously difficult, because you're having to make assessments in terms of the impact on our members, and therefore on our memberships, and therefore on our finances. What could we do? What couldn't we do? What should we do? What could be delayed? What do we have to do? And how were we going to operate during that period? We were having to deal with things we'd never dealt with before. I mean, being in a position where the government said you can't have your meetings, well, what do we do about that? How do we do it? And how do we stay in touch with everybody? And out of that, actually, it was really good that First Rising came about, because we were able for the first time to talk directly to our individual members, and that's who we represent on the board. You know,
let's talk about rulers now and the board of general purposes. But before we do move on, thank you for the work you and the board did during that time of the pandemic. We know it was very stressful for the country, very stressful for everybody, and wouldn't have been an easy time for the board. So thank you very much indeed for everything you did on behalf of everybody watching that.
But forgive me, but could I just mention one person who I haven't mentioned, who was on the board as a provincial Grand Master, because I don't want our northern area thinking they were forgotten. None other than Right Worshipful Brother Stephen Varley.
Oh yes, we do not want to leave him out.
And Right Worshipful Brother Stephen is of course gone on to greater things, and is now one of our assistant Grand Masters. And he's again been tremendously helpful, not just because of that, but because he was closely involved with membership and the pathway. And the pathway for members is really important. It's part of the future. It's very much part of the strategy for the future. And I think it's going to be very helpful for everybody. And I think with Right Worshipful Brother Stephen in the role that he'll now have going forward, and I'll talk a bit about that in a moment, if I may, I think that's going to be really good for Freemasonry.
Absolutely, Jeffrey. He is the perfect man for the job, isn't he? No, thank you for mentioning that. Now let's talk about the relationship between the Board of General Purposes and rulers. How does that actually work?
Well, it's got to work, and it's got to work really well. And I'm pleased to say to you, Brodie, from my perspective, it absolutely does. And I will have regular conversations with the Programme Master, and have done throughout my period of office. And that continues right up to today. And ditto with the deputy, and ditto with the assistant Grand Masters. It's absolutely critical that the board and the rulers are on the same page, both to deliver and deal with the strategy, which, as you know, is a strategy for a 7-year period, but also all the fundamentals of what we do and how we do it. it's absolutely vital because the rulers are key in a lot of the decisions, obviously, that the Grand Master will make. He's the head of our order, and you have the Grand Master's prerogative, and that many issues need to take all that into account. Then on the other side, on the administrative side, where the board's key, the rulers need to understand and be on side with whatever needs to be done at any given time. So as you might imagine, great conversations during the period of the pandemic, really important. There was also great conversations during that time with the MCF, and I had the privilege of being on a little committee that helped with ideas from the provinces in terms of funding for particular projects. And the work that was done in that period by Freemasons all over the country, indeed all over the world, in our districts as well, was absolutely phenomenal. And from my perspective, it was actually humbling. It was absolutely tremendous, the work that was done. And on the back of that, we had the best ever period in terms of publicity. We had, in a fairly short period of time, we had over 400 individual pieces of journalism which were positive about Freemasonry. And I don't think there's ever been a president who could say that.
No, it was, it's the old term, isn't it? Unique times, unprecedented times. And no, you're right. We achieved a lot during what we hope never returns again. So we've spoken about the relationship between the board and rulers. What about districts? Do you represent districts as well?
The board does, Brodie. The board represents the districts, and I have in the past been asked the question, are you going to have a district Grand Master on the board, which is a reasonable question to ask. I think it's very important to start from the position of the representation, and we have 170,000 members approximately currently. Of that number, 15,000 are district members, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable suggestion to say, well, how are they represented on the board? And I've given it thought, and it's purely a personal view. And I've just had a chat with one or two district Grand Masters to see what they think. But I think that there is one thought is that because the districts are so different in terms of their geopolitics, it's very difficult for perhaps a district Grand Master in South America or South Africa or Australia or the Caribbean to represent all districts. However, I think it's possible to have a system where you had a district Grand Master who was on the board, but for a set term. So let's say it was 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, then it would go to another district Grand Master from another area. And in dealing with it that way, there is a representative from the districts on the board, and it would automatically cycle through every district over time. I think one of the good things that we've done in Freemasonry in terms of representation, bearing in mind we've got 47 different provinces plus Met in England and Wales. I think one of the good things from that are the RCGs, the regional communication groups, and perhaps something similar would be possible in terms of representation because there are a lot of districts. So that's, again, these are just my sort of random thoughts on that particular subject, but I understand the point and it's a good question.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Really appreciate that. And a lot of the questions that I'm asking have come to us via email, so thank you very much indeed for those. Let's talk about then the strategy and how important it is. Has the Board of General Purposes had to change direction a little bit to align itself with the strategy in any way?
I've already mentioned the discussions between members of the board and the rulers, and I have the privilege of sitting on the strategy committee, which is chaired by the program master, and that will continue in terms of the big picture. I'm stepping I'm stepping down, Prody, as president. Despite appearances, my age is going to catch me up, I'm afraid. But I will stay in touch with this going forward. But I will have a successor when we get to the investiture in April. So from my point of view, you've got to be behind the strategy. It's absolutely key, and the issues covered by the strategy, I think, are really important for the future of Freemasonry. Freemasonry has survived for 300 years because it's evolved to meet the needs of the society at the age in which we live, and this is part of that process. So it's important that we are all behind the strategy, which of course includes the board. In terms of changes, the basic underlying committees of the board are still there and still relevant, and not affected, because the fundamental issues are not affected by any involvement of the strategy, except in certain cases. So it is relevant when you're looking perhaps at structure. It is relevant when you're looking at the big working parties. And going back to what I was saying about regional communication groups, I should have gone on to say that in England and Wales we have 9 plus Met. Now 9 plus Met is a lot more manageable than 47 plus 1, and because of that we're able to have one group who are then representing every part of the country, and that's exactly what's going to happen going forward. So in the past, up until now, and this was in my time we did this, we used regional communication groups to make quite sure that in your world, communication and marketing, we had someone from each area on that working party, and ditto with regard to membership. Membership, as you well know, with this particular broadcast, communication is wider, and membership covers areas of communication as well anyway. What we're doing now, which is Solomon, which is learning and development, which is Right Worshipful Brother and Anthony Howard Malton, who's on that particular committee, but his key is as chairman of the Learning and Development Group. We've had the same thing with Right Worshipful Brother Stephen Varley and the Pathway, and we've had Right Worshipful Brother Ian Chandler chairing communications and marketing. And in order to make it as effective as possible, the view's being taken that we need a ruler to chair, but to chair both areas and to bring both areas together. So effective from now, we will have one committee, and that committee will be chaired by Right Worshipful Brother Stephen Varley, and it will cover both membership, and communications will back membership, so the matters will be discussed together. I think that's got to be a good idea, because communication for me has always been key to membership. You've got to have good communication. And when I think about communication, the most important thing is all of you out there, our members. It's what goes on in the lodge that's absolutely fundamental. We've now got a method of talking to you as individuals through First Rising. We talk to the provincial Grand Masters and the district Grand Masters through our briefings. So that I think works at that level. And it is for every province to have good communications with its individual lodges, and indeed the members of the lodges. And different provinces will have different means of achieving that, but it's fundamental. So unless you have the members on side and they get it, and unless you have the lodges on side and they get it, is it going to work? Question mark. So the provinces have got to be responsible for getting it down to the lodge and into every single member, and we need to back it. We all need to back it to be effective, and to look forward to what I think will be a very fulfilling future.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier on that a lot of the questions that I'm asking have come to us via email. And we spoke about the pandemic earlier on and the board's role with regards to that and keeping Freemasonry going. That was a dark time for the country. But what about those wonderful times, some of those wonderful things you've been involved with, Geoffrey? Perhaps you could tell us about some of those.
Well, yes. I mean, on the dark side, I had to start with when you could start to see what was going on. I needed all the help I could get to help with, well, what happens to the finances? I mean, if we don't have income here and income there, how are we going to pay for this, that, and the other? This is a vast building, 405,000 square feet. Our gas bill went up by a multiple of 6 to a vast sum of money. And okay, that's more recent, but we still have all the overhead cost, whether we've got money coming in or not. The overhead cost is there, and you can't escape that. So we had to make some assumptions. So during the two and a half years of COVID, we knew where we were being hit. We were being hit because we couldn't have any initiations. That's 8,000 men a year were not becoming Freemasons, and therefore no dues were being paid. Nobody was meeting here, so that income wasn't coming in either from chapters or lodges, and it wasn't coming in from the commercial world. And they're very, very significant sums of money. Plus our tenants, particularly in the retail business, were having real difficulty in paying the rent, and we had to take a sensible view with regard to how we dealt with them. And so that was a really tough period because our income was being reduced, and big questions had to be thought about, such as what would the impact be on Freemasonry of falling out of a system where we're having regular meetings and seeing each other regularly, and are there financial consequences as well? So in addition to the awful prospect of our losing members because they passed away during the pandemic, we also had the issue of people not being able to meet and therefore perhaps took a different view of Freemasonry going forward. How many members would we lose and how many memberships would we lose? Because that's fundamental to our income, which enables us to pay our expenses. So these were big questions. I'm pleased to say that we took a light touch and optimistic approach. And I'm very pleased to be able to say that circumstances as they developed backed that decision. And what makes me immensely comfortable with the strength of Freemasonry is that during the 3 toughest years I've had since I've been a Mason, which is nearly 50 years, we only lost 3% in each of the 3 years of the pandemic. And because of that, we were able to control things. We were able to put off certain projects that we had. If I could give you one example, Regent Street disease affects Freemasons Hall, as you know, Brodie. And what we've done with regard to it is bit by bit by bit, we've adjusted that. We have to do the main central tower, which is a big piece of work. And when I first looked at the figures for that, it was something like £1.7 million to do that piece of work.
Wow. Wow.
We should have been doing that 2 or 3 years ago, but we had to put it back in order to maintain our cash flow and to be prudent. And so we did put it back, and it came up again literally in the last 12 months, and fresh estimates were obtained. And one of the positive things about the delay is that new methods have been found which are less expensive. And instead of 1.7 million, the whole of the tower and all of the work, including professional fees, is budgeted at the moment for less than 1 million. And that's has saved us a lot of money, but also we've put it into operation this year. The papers have been signed, and you'll see all the scaffolding up, and you'll see the work being done in that particular area. And it's planned to have that finished by October. And that's a great step to have taken. But it also, I look back and say, do you know what, we were fortunate. We're fortunate we've been so strong through this period, that Freemasonry has that strength. And we're fortunate in the way that that has gone. So that's been the most difficult area through the dark side. On the bright side, I was so impressed with the huge, I mean, you're talking about hundreds of tons of food made available to people who were really struggling financially. I mean, tens of thousands of hot meals produced by Freemasons up and down the country. I was aware of contracts that were signed all over the world to get protective equipment. I was particularly aware of one with China, where equipment was provided for both masks and overall protective equipment. And we made sure it went to care homes at a time when care homes really did need looking after. And I can go on and on about that. There were a huge number of examples, and it's not one province, it's over the entire country. Freemasons in their communities were absolutely fantastic. And it's one of the strengths of Freemasonry, it's one of the important things going forward.
So that's interesting, isn't it, when we talk about the future of Freemasonry and we look back at what we've done, because often the good comes from the bad, doesn't it? And that's, I guess, a great example of that. How does the board get judged, Jeffrey? How is it judged by Freemasons, would you say?
I think that's a difficult question to answer, because there's no, well, there is an audit, but the audit isn't sort of public unless you're prepared to go through the massive amount that comes out of an annual accounts audit. I mean, I'm dealing with the last year at the moment, up to the end of December 2022, and there's a massive information there and issues, and you cover them with the auditors, etc. So I think probably my starting point is that one of the most difficult things to do at the level of the board is the budget, because there's never, as it were, there's never enough money to do everything when you want to do it. So you've got to prioritize. And I think the members are trusting of the board, and I would very much hope that they believe that trust is well placed, in the sense that we try very hard to have a measured budget to make absolutely sure that on projects we use investment income or income from properties that UGLE own to fund those particular events, not the members. So the members, and that's remained throughout my period of time, the members pay for the service, in other words, the people we employ and what we have to do to keep Freemasonry going for them. We represent our members, and we do the best we can for our members. So the budget for me is a key area that is assessed not only by outside auditors, but we also have our own audit committee. And the audit committee is, and the members can take comfort from this, it is a test. So during my time, I was on the risk management committee until I made the point that perhaps there are circumstances where one's looking directly at the president because it's been his decision to do something. Therefore, the audit committee or the risk management committee perhaps should take the president out. And I willingly agreed that, because I thought that was appropriate. Doesn't stop me making decisions, but I think it's reasonable those decisions are looked at by other people. And from the point of view of the risk committee, we've had various aspects in front of us to test them, which means that the individual directors or managers within the organization who we employ came along to the risk management meetings to discuss what they did, what their concerns were, where they thought their risks were, and we went through that many times. And an example, a simple example, which everybody will get, is one of the biggest crime of our age. There's more of it than anything else put together, is cybercrime. It's absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
And I used to do a bit of work in that area, and back in the day, I'm going back a number of years, you had 65 or 70% of every company, you're talking about 2 million companies plus that are registered, were affected with cybercrime. And if you think of the scams that are out there now, probably everybody who's listening to this today has had somebody try to scam them at some point. I know I have, both at a personal level and at a business level. And you've got to be very, very cautious with your IT and have procedures and policies. The policies have got to be followed by the procedures, and you must not depart from them. It doesn't matter who you are. And so all of those sorts of things need to be checked, thought about. So we have that sort of check and balance. And the composition of the board, I think, is a good mix from people from different backgrounds, different skills, different parts of the country. And the combination of that, I think, again, a lot of questions are raised or points are made, and the balance that we come out with at the end of the day, I think is good. And I think the skill base that's there now that I referred to earlier is again good, so that the right decisions are made. Different people will have different views on the right priorities, and there has to be a balance there. But the services the member gets, the value for money for the member, is certainly one of the absolutely key things from my point of view. Also, I believe, rightly or wrongly, that this organization to a man would value Freemasons Hall and all that it provides as our headquarters. And so the building itself is important to everybody. And a lot of good work's being done in terms of investment, both in property and financial investments. And we've had good advisors, and that's, again, we've got good people to keep an eye on.
Essential, isn't it? Absolutely essential. Jeffrey, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. One more question before we say goodnight. Looking to the future of Freemasonry now and taking the board of general purposes into account and the new strategy, what are you most looking forward to seeing in the next few years?
Well, I think I'm looking forward to seeing the strategy play out and be successful, because if we can get our communications as good as they can be, and we're doing lots of work with that now, as I think you'll get information over the coming times that will give you much encouragement there. As communications improve, as more success is delivered through the provinces, through the individual lodges, through our individual members, our membership numbers, I think, will go up and go up quite quickly. I personally believe that in each lodge, if we can really get the almoner talking to the mentor, talking to the membership officer, the pathway officer, and the secretary, then it all works very well, and we will have new members. And I think it's a grand organization. I think the strategy, with the solid foundations that absolutely key, integrity in the world in which we're in, is such an important issue. Respect, being an inclusive organization that respects other people. Our charity work. For me, if you said to me, Jeffrey, what's the greatest thing you've got from Freemasonry? Do you know, it's the people I've met on the journey. It's the friendships that have evolved and delivered. I've met some great people who I have a huge amount of time for. And that's been one of the joys of being as involved as I have been over the years. And I say more of that for the future. We are the greatest support organization I can think of. And we've been here for over 300 years. And I believe we really need to be here for another 300 years, particularly in the environment in which we live today. It's good news.
It is exciting times ahead. Jeffrey, have you enjoyed your Solomon Live experience?
Absolutely, Brody, and you've been a very good interviewer. Thank you.
No, it's been a privilege to talk to you. And yes, you mentioned earlier on that you are stepping down as the president of the Board of General Purposes. I've got a sneaky feeling, though, Jeffrey, you're not going to be slowing down anytime soon, from what I know. But we'll look forward to seeing your future pan out. And I should tell you, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. And we will be back with you next month. Our next Solomon Live will be Tuesday, the 18th of April. And that will be Discover Special Interest Lodges. Well, we will find out about those lodges where you can enjoy Freemasonry as well as your favourite sport, hobby and other interests that you might have as well. So please put that in your diary, but we won't let you forget. Tuesday, the 18th of April at 7:30. And if you haven't done so already, why not? Please register for Solomon, solomon.ugle.org.uk, full of useful and fantastic content for your daily advancement in Masonic knowledge. Until then, thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll see you back here very, very soon.